As a priest, I've seen a lot. There's no way around it. Over the years, I've stood with families as they said their final goodbyes, offered comfort when words felt inadequate, and watched the weight of grief hang heavy in the air like a storm waiting to break. But there are some funerals that stay with you, not because of the deceased, but because of the living. It was a crisp November morning when the Patterson family came to us. They were regulars at the church, always sitting in the same pew every Sunday, always polite, always there. But this time, it wasn't for a Sunday service. This time, it was to bury their mother, Dorothy, who had passed after a long battle with cancer. Dorothy had been a fixture in the community. She had been the one to bake pies for church events, the one to offer a helping hand when someone was in need, and the one to keep everyone's spirits lifted with her kind words. But over the past few months, as her illness worsened, she had become a shadow of herself. The laughter, the light that used to shine so brightly in her eyes slowly faded. I had visited her at the hospital, and as I looked into her tired eyes, I could see the grief, not just from the disease, but from something deeper. It was like she was mourning something she couldn't name. I remember that day clearly, standing at the front of the chapel, looking out at the sea of black suits and dresses, all of them mourning the loss of a woman they had loved. The service went as it always does. Eulogies, prayers, hymns. People wept, families embraced, and I stood there, offering the comfort I could. But there was something strange in the air that day, something I couldn't quite place. As the service drew to a close, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. A man, someone I didn't recognize, had slipped into the back of the chapel. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that seemed too familiar, though I couldn't say why. He was dressed in a black suit, but his eyes, there was something off about them. They weren't sad, not the way you'd expect someone to look at a funeral. They were empty, like there was nothing behind them. No grief, no pain, just emptiness. I tried to ignore it. I did my best to focus on the task at hand, prayers, blessings, final goodbyes. But the man wouldn't leave my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even when I turned away. After the service, as the family prepared to move to the burial site, I stayed behind for a moment to speak with one of the pallbearers. That was when I saw it again. The man was still standing at the back of the chapel, motionless, not even pretending to mourn. He was just there. And then, without a word, he walked out, disappearing into the cold, foggy morning air. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later as I was driving home, I received a phone call. It was Mrs. Patterson, Dorothy's daughter. She was distraught, her voice shaky. "Father," she said, her voice breaking, "there's someone here, someone who shouldn't be. They've been standing by the grave, just watching. He wasn't invited." My heart dropped. The image of that man, the emptiness in his eyes, flashed before my mind. I rushed back to the cemetery, the wind biting at my face as I arrived. The family had already gathered around Dorothy's grave, but I saw no sign of the man. The grave was silent, the air thick with the weight of the finality of it all. But then, as I turned to face the family, I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the cemetery, watching from a distance. This time I could see the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. It wasn't a smile of grief. It was something else, a twisted, unsettling grin that sent a chill straight through me. I approached the family, trying to keep my composure. They hadn't seen the man, he was too far away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to Dorothy's passing. I asked around, but no one knew who he was. No one had seen him before. He wasn't a relative, a friend, or even a neighbor. I watched as the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist of the morning, leaving only the eerie silence behind him. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. The man, his smile, his presence, it all felt wrong, but I never spoke of it to the family. There was no point. What could I have said? They were already grieving, and there was no reason to add to their pain with something that seemed so impossible. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Dorothy's death had brought something with it. A presence, a shadow, something left behind, unspoken, lurking in the corners of their mourning. I never saw the man again, and every time I wonder, what if some grief is too heavy to ever leave? What if some mourning never truly ends? And now, a huge thank you to all my amazing viewers for joining me in these bone-chilling stories. If you're new here and enjoyed getting chills down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe to venture deeper into the shadows with us. Each like fuels the darkness, bringing more chilling, haunting stories to light. Now, steady your nerves as we cruise into our next horrifying story. I've been a priest for over 25 years now, and in that time I've seen just about everything you'd expect from someone in my position. I've presided over countless funerals, been with families as they grieve, shared in their sorrow, and offered the peace that death, strangely enough, sometimes brings. And yet, there are moments in my career that still unsettle me, moments that even the passage of time hasn't allowed me to fully understand or shake off. There's one funeral in particular that I think about often. I don't speak of it much. Too many strange things happened that day, too many unanswered questions. But every once in a while, in the dead of night when the silence feels too heavy, I remember it. And it still sends a chill up my spine. It was a cold winter's morning when I first met George Daniels. He wasn't a member of the church, hadn't attended in years to be honest. But his wife, Mary, had been one of the most devout parishioners we had. George, on the other hand, had always kept his distance. A man of few words, a bit gruff, but Mary loved him all the same. She was good-hearted, the type who would drop everything to help anyone. And George, well, he wasn't always easy to love. Still, Mary never complained. She was a faithful wife, and when George was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she took care of him with a devotion I've seldom seen. When I received the call that George had passed, I wasn't surprised. He'd been in hospice for weeks, and his condition had steadily worsened. The family made the arrangements quietly, just the closest relatives attending, nothing too extravagant. It was to be a simple service. I arrived at the funeral home early that morning to find everything in order. The casket was prepared, the flowers were arranged, and the room was set up for the wake. Mary was sitting in the front row, her face a mask of grief, but still strong. The sorrow in her eyes was unmistakable, but she smiled faintly when she saw me. We exchanged pleasantries, and I offered my condolences, though I felt uncomfortable. There was something off about the whole situation, something that didn't quite sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As the service began, I led the family in prayer, said the usual words over George's body, and shared some comforting verses. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Not just the family, not just the mourners. No, this felt different. This was something else. Every time I glanced around the room, I felt the weight of a gaze on me, like someone was standing too close behind me. And though I couldn't see anyone, the sensation grew stronger as the service went on. At one point, after I had said the final prayer and was about to close the service, I stepped to the side of the casket to give the family some time for reflection. And that's when I saw him. It was a man, standing at the back of the room, just beyond the family, dressed in a dark overcoat and a flat cap. He was looking at George's body, his posture stiff, almost reverent. He didn't speak, didn't move, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. Something that made me feel like he didn't belong. I excused myself quietly and walked toward him, assuming he was a distant relative, someone I hadn't met yet. But as I drew closer, I realized something. His face wasn't familiar at all. None of the family had mentioned anyone else coming. And there was something about the way he stood, something too still, too perfect in his posture. I approached him, gently touching his arm. "Sir," I asked, "can I help you?" When he turned, I almost stepped back. His face, pale, drawn, looked almost familiar, but I couldn't place him. He had deep-set eyes, hollowed cheeks, and a weariness about him that spoke of a life well lived, but somehow hollow. It was the face of someone I might have seen around town, but it didn't make sense that he'd be here. "I'm just here to pay my respects," he said quietly, his voice calm, low. His voice sounded distant, far off, like he was speaking from a place I couldn't quite reach. He didn't seem in a hurry, didn't seem anxious to leave, and yet there was something unsettling about the way he spoke. "We've already said our goodbyes," I told him gently. "I'm afraid the family will be leaving soon." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the casket. His eyes never strayed to mine, as though he couldn't tear himself away from George's body. "I'm just waiting for him to wake up," he murmured, almost to himself. I felt a strange chill in the air. His words weren't entirely out of place, but something about them didn't feel right. Was he a friend of George's from his past? Had they shared a connection that no one had mentioned? "Is there anything I can do for you?" I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. He shook his head slowly, his gaze still fixed on the casket. "No," he said softly. Just waiting." I stood there for a moment longer, watching him. The whole situation was beginning to feel wrong, like something was slipping just beyond my understanding. He didn't move, didn't leave, just stood in that strange reverence. Finally, I backed away, leaving him by the casket. But before I left, I glanced at the family, at Mary, her face hidden in her hands, sobbing quietly, and I asked, almost on instinct, "Is there anyone else here? Anyone who hasn't been introduced?" "No," Mary said through her tears, looking up at me. "Just us, Father." I nodded and turned back to the man at the back of the room, but when I looked again, he was gone. Completely. No footsteps, no sound of the door opening or closing, just gone. I searched the room, thinking maybe he had stepped out, but there was no sign of him. I asked the attendants, but they hadn't seen anyone. They had been in the back, preparing the burial arrangements, and no one had passed them on their way out. I even checked the parking lot to see if his car was parked nearby. Nothing. Confused, I returned to the family, finished the service, and followed them to the cemetery for the burial. But the entire time I couldn't shake the memory of that man, the look in his eyes, the strange calmness about him. Weeks went by and I tried to put it out of my mind. But it wasn't long before I found myself thinking about it again. And that's when I received the phone call. It was Mary, her voice trembling. She had just received the death certificate for George. "Father," she said, "I don't know how to explain this, but there's a picture of George in the file. A photo from the hospital just before he passed, but it isn't the one we took." I felt a lump form in my throat as she continued. "This one, it looks like him, but it's not the same. He's standing at the foot of his own bed, looking out the window. He's wearing the same clothes, but his eyes are different. They're not his, they're someone else's." I didn't say anything for a moment. The man I had seen at the funeral, the one who had been so eerily calm, wasn't just anyone. He wasn't a relative or friend. He was George. How could that be possible? And then I remembered what he had said, his strange words, just waiting for him to wake up. It's been years since that day, but every time I stand over a casket or offer prayers for the departed, I think back to that moment. And I still wonder, how much of us is truly gone when we die? How much of our souls, our spirits linger behind unnoticed, waiting in the shadows? I'll never have the answer. And maybe in a way I'm better off not knowing. But I can't shake the feeling that George didn't just die that day. He attended his own funeral, and for some reason, he wasn't ready to let go. It was a quiet afternoon when Michael came to see me. He wasn't exactly a stranger. I had known him for years through his family. His mother, Kate, and his father, John, had been active members of the church. They were the kind of couple that seemed perfect on the outside, always there for others, always so composed. But like many things, appearances can be deceiving. Their marriage ended in silence, a slow, painful unraveling no one talked about. And Michael, their only son, seemed to carry the weight of it all on his shoulders. After the divorce, he disappeared from the church, his visits becoming rare, his presence felt less and less. So when Michael showed up at my office that afternoon, I wasn't sure what to expect. He was different. His face was pale and his eyes were full of something I couldn't place. Desperation, maybe? Regret? It was unsettling to see him this way, and I could tell he had something on his mind, something heavy. "Father, I need your help," he began, his voice almost a whisper. "I need to make things right. I don't know what else to do." He wasn't looking at me as he spoke, but I could feel his eyes, full of pain, staring into the space between us. I waited, letting him find his words, but I could already sense that something wasn't quite right. "Michael, what's going on?" I asked, my voice steady but concerned. "What do you mean? Make things right?" He swallowed hard, his hands trembling in his lap as he finally looked up at me, his gaze haunted. I've caused so much pain," he muttered, his words choking him. "I've never told them the truth, Father. I don't even know how it happened. But it's all my fault. My parents, they never knew why things ended. They never knew the truth, and I've carried it all this time. I can't bear it anymore." I felt a coldness fill the room, as if the very air had shifted. The weight of his words settled on my chest, and I had to pause for a moment. I could feel the grief radiating off him, but I couldn't make sense of it. What was he talking about? "Michael," I said slowly, my heart racing with concern. "What truth? What are you saying? You've always had your family's best interest at heart." He closed his eyes, shaking his head as if fighting back tears. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "The accident, I was the one who caused it. I was drunk, Father. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But my father, he was in that car with me. We both survived the crash, but he never forgave me. I never told him the truth. I thought if I kept it a secret, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. My mother left him because of it, and they never spoke to each other again." My hands clenched together as I processed his confession. Michael had been the one behind the wheel of that car, the accident that had shaken their family to its core. But it wasn't just the accident, it was the truth, buried deep, never revealed, never acknowledged. His father had lived with the guilt and the pain, and his mother had left because of it. "I never told them the truth," Michael continued, his voice cracking. "I couldn't bear to see the look on their faces when they found out. But now I need to tell them, before it's too late." The air around us grew colder, and I felt a strange, unsettling presence in the room. The chapel felt still, but the silence was thick, pressing in on me like a heavy fog. It was as though Michael wasn't really here with me anymore. His form flickered, his outline growing fainter, as though he were slowly dissolving into the ether. "Father, please," Michael whispered, his eyes pleading. "I need to make things right. I don't know how to reach them, but I need to fix this." I stood, my feet feeling unsteady, my heart racing. There was no doubt in my mind now. Michael's spirit was present, desperate to make amends. But the question lingered. Could a spirit truly make things right with the living? "Michael," I said softly, "you've already done more than most people ever will. You've confessed, you've shared your regret, but you must let them find their own peace too." "I can't," he whispered, his voice fading with each passing second. "I've waited too long." As I reached out, trying to comfort him, Michael's figure flickered one last time, and then, in an instant, he was gone. No sound, no trace, just the cold emptiness that filled the room in his absence. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what had just happened. I had heard of spirits returning, of restless souls seeking peace, but I never thought I'd experience it myself. But Michael was gone. His presence faded into nothingness, leaving me alone in the room. A few minutes later, just as I was recovering from the shock, my phone buzzed. The message, when I checked it, was from Kate, Michael's mother. The words on the screen made my heart stop. "Father, we need to talk. John and I have been thinking. After everything, we both realize how much we've been holding on to. Maybe we've been wrong all these years. Maybe it's time to let go of the anger. We both miss Michael." I couldn't believe what I was reading. My mind raced back to my conversation with Michael. He had been with me just moments ago, his spirit filled with such desperation to make things right. And now, his parents, still alive but broken, were communicating with me as if a bridge had been built between them. Something had changed. I immediately called them and asked if we could meet. The conversation that followed was one of the most emotional I've ever had. In that meeting, I told Kate and John exactly what Michael had shared with me. I told them that their son, before he had passed, had expressed deep regret for the pain he had caused. I explained that he had never told them the truth about the accident, the guilt he had carried all these years, and how his heart had ached for them to be together again. I told them that he wanted them to know how sorry he was, and that he hoped they could find it in themselves to forgive each other. Kate and John sat there in silence, their eyes filled with tears. After a long pause, John spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I never knew. I never knew how much he carried inside. Kate nodded, her hands trembling. We've both been so hurt, but hearing this now, maybe it's time to move forward. For him. That night, after years of silence, they sat down together and talked. They opened up about their pain, their regret, and the love they still had for each other. The walls that had stood between them for so long began to crumble, piece by piece. They decided to try again, to rebuild what they had lost. When I left their home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It was the kind of peace that only comes after a storm has passed, when the air feels clear, when everything is finally settled into place. The next day at Michael's funeral, I watched as his parents, united once again, sat side by side. There was a calmness to them, a sense of healing that had been impossible just days before. I said my final prayers for Michael, but in my heart, I knew he had already found what he needed. Somehow Michael's spirit had bridged the gap. His message had brought the reconciliation he had so desperately sought. As I walked away from the gravesite, I felt a soft whisper on the wind, as if Michael's soul had finally found peace. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that even the deepest regrets can be healed, that sometimes the dead leave behind the most powerful messages of all. There's something about death. I've witnessed it hundreds, maybe thousands of times in my life as a priest. At funerals, in the quiet of confessionals, in the somber glow of candlelit vigils, death is constant. But there's another thing about death, something darker that most don't talk about. The lingering. The way grief doesn't always fade when the last mourner leaves. How it can stay like a shadow, unseen but felt, hovering just beyond the reach of daylight. I've been a priest for more than 12 years now, and in all that time, I've learned to live with death, or at least to accept its presence. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was the day death followed me home. It was late autumn, the kind of chilly evening that makes the days feel shorter, the nights too long. I had just finished a long day of services, the kind that leave you drained, not physically, but emotionally. People come to you with their burdens, their griefs, their confessions, and by the end of the day, it's hard to shake off the weight of it all. I remember it clearly that evening. I had closed up the church, turned off the lights in the hallways, and said my final prayers for the night. My car was parked near the back entrance, just a few steps from the side door. The walk was short, and as I made my way toward it, I felt that chill again. It wasn't the cold air, it was something else, something that felt out of place. But I didn't think much of it. In my line of work, there are moments when you sense the presence of grief more acutely than others. It's the nature of the job, and sometimes you learn to ignore it. So I got in my car, started the engine, and began the quiet drive home. It was only a 15-minute drive from the church to my small home on the outskirts of town, and for most of it, the road was empty, not a soul in sight. But as I approached my street, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. I glanced over my shoulder quickly, but saw nothing unusual. I told myself it was the reflection of my own headlights, maybe the angle of the road playing tricks on my eyes. But the feeling didn't leave. It was like an oppressive force that seemed to grow heavier the closer I got to home. I pulled into my driveway, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows across the yard. I got out, locking the car behind me, and made my way to the front door. That's when I saw it, the shadow. It was on the edge of the porch, just at the corner of my house, right by the window. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but when I stepped closer, I realized the shape wasn't quite right. It wasn't natural. It was too tall, too still. And when I blinked, it didn't move. I could feel my heart beginning to pound as my thoughts raced. This wasn't just a shadow. Something was wrong. I turned my eyes away for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of it. When I looked back, the shadow was still there, but now it was moving, slowly, like it was drawn toward me. It didn't make any noise, no creaking of the porch boards, no whisper of footsteps on the gravel. It just moved. I walked slowly toward the door, my legs feeling heavy as if the ground itself was trying to hold me back. I don't know why I didn't run inside, why I didn't lock myself away. When I reached the door, I turned the handle and stepped inside, shutting it behind me with more force than I intended. I leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady my breath, trying to shake the cold feeling that had crept into my bones. But as I stood there, trying to compose myself, I heard it. A faint tapping. It came from the window beside me. It wasn't the wind, no, the tapping was too rhythmic. I glanced toward the window and saw the shadow. It was there, pressed against the glass, just beyond the curtain. The outline of something tall and angular, but when I looked closer, it didn't have the shape of a human form. The tapping continued, almost like it was waiting for me to open the window. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But the tapping didn't stop. It continued, unrelenting. Finally, I did what I've done countless times in my life. I prayed. I prayed the way I had been taught, the way I always had, calling on the Lord for strength, for protection, for peace. I stood there in my own house, holding my breath, waiting for something to change, and then it stopped. The tapping, the presence, the shadow, all of it. The shadow that had loomed by the window vanished, as though it never existed. I truly believed that my heartfelt prayer had driven away whatever it was that lingered in the darkness. I was able to sleep feeling safe and calm, finally free from the heaviness of fear. In moments of darkness, we often forget how powerful a quiet, sincere prayer can be. Sometimes it's all we need to find peace. As a priest, I've presided over many funerals. I've stood at the head of caskets, offering prayers over the dead and comforting the living. But there's one funeral that I will never forget. It was one that didn't just linger in my thoughts. It haunted me. It was a rainy evening in early spring, the kind of night where the clouds hang low, heavy with the promise of more rain. The sort of evening when everything feels muted, as if the world is trying to shut out the noise. The service that evening was for a woman named Susan George, an elderly woman well into her 80s, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep after a long life. The family wasn't large. There were only a few people present for the service: her daughter, 2 grandchildren, and a couple of close family friends. The usual arrangements were made, the casket prepared, and the service was going according to plan. But there was something about it, something about that night, that I couldn't shake. I had just finished reciting the eulogy, and we were about to proceed to the gravesite. As the family made their way to the hearse, I stayed behind, as I often do, to offer a final prayer and ensure everything was in order for the burial. The funeral home was quiet, save for the occasional sound of footsteps and the rain tapping against the windows. I began to gather my things, preparing to leave for the cemetery when I heard it, a woman crying. It wasn't loud or frantic, just soft sobs, like someone who was trying to keep their emotions in check, but failing. I turned instinctively, looking for the source of the sound, but the room was empty. There was no one in the chapel except for me, the attendants, and the deceased. The family had already left. I stood still for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just the sound of the wind outside, or maybe the echo of the rain, playing tricks on my mind. But the sobbing continued, faint yet unmistakable. I followed the sound down the aisle, but when I reached the back of the chapel, there was no one there. The doors were locked and the lights were dim. Everything was still. I stepped back into the main part of the chapel, my mind racing. It wasn't a new thing, hearing strange sounds in funeral homes. After years of working in the field, I've learned to accept the oddities. People talk about hearing voices or footsteps, even when no one is around. But this felt different. The sobs felt too real, too present. I checked the side rooms, the office, the hallway leading out to the back of the building. I even stepped outside for a moment, thinking perhaps someone had been left behind, someone who hadn't made it to the gravesite yet. But there was no one, only the steady sound of rain falling from the sky. I returned to the chapel, and just as I entered, I heard the sobbing again. It was softer now, as if it had moved. It came from the far corner of the room near the casket where Clara lay. I froze. There, standing in the corner, I saw her. A woman, dressed in black, her head lowered in mourning, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her. She was bent over, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her grief. She wasn't crying loudly, but I could hear her muffled sobs, as though she was fighting to keep her composure. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what to do. Was this someone who had come in late? A distant relative who had missed the service? But as I got closer, I noticed something unsettling. Her face. It was hidden beneath the veil of her black dress, but I could see enough, just enough, to make out the outline of her features. Her face wasn't unfamiliar, but it wasn't anyone I recognized. It wasn't Susan's daughter or any of the family friends who had attended the service. I didn't know who she was, and that made me uneasy. I cleared my throat, stepping closer, unsure if I should say something, if I should offer my condolences. But as soon as I took a step forward, she stopped. The sobbing ceased, and the air grew unnervingly still. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice betraying the anxiety creeping up my spine. The woman didn't answer. She didn't even move. For a long moment we stood there in complete silence. And then, slowly, she turned her head. I wish I could say it was a slow, graceful turn, like someone wiping away their tears. But it wasn't. It was mechanical. The way her head twisted to face me was unnatural, almost like something was forcing her to look at me, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. And when I saw her face, I could feel my stomach drop. It wasn't just that I didn't recognize her, it was the look in her eyes. There was no sorrow there, no grief, no recognition of loss, only emptiness. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, like two dark pools that swallowed everything around them. There was nothing human in that gaze. I stepped back, my heart racing in my chest. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice wouldn't come. I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from hers. And then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, she whispered, "Why did you leave me here?" The words hit me like a cold slap to the face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly began to step away from the corner, her movement smooth and deliberate, like she was gliding toward me. But her feet never touched the floor. My breath caught in my throat as she reached out for me, her hand hovering just inches from my face. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was a gesture of need. She wasn't reaching for me as a mourner reaches for support. No, it was something darker, something desperate, as if she needed me to acknowledge her, to help her in some way I couldn't understand. In a panic, I stumbled back, bumping into the pews behind me. I heard the soft rustle of her veil as she moved, but I didn't turn to look again. I couldn't. I didn't know what she wanted, and I was afraid to find out. I rushed out of the chapel. The sobbing stopped. The chapel fell silent again. I never saw the woman again. When I returned to the chapel the next day to check on the arrangements, everything was as it should be. Quiet, still, as though nothing had happened. The casket was there, Susan's daughter and family had come and gone, and no one spoke of a woman in black who wasn't supposed to be there. But I've thought about her often. I think about her every time I stand at the front of a room filled with mourners. The look in her eyes, the emptiness that seemed to radiate from her, still chills me. And when I'm alone, in the quiet of the chapel, I sometimes hear it again, the faintest sob, carried on the wind, echoing from the corners of the room. Maybe some things are meant to be felt, not understood. There are moments that leave an impression so deep, they stay with you, quietly reminding you of the unseen threads that connect us all.